I caught my mother-in-law rearranging our bedroom while I was at work because she said my wife deserved better taste. I was standing in my own bedroom doorway at 3:15 on a Thursday afternoon, watching my mother-in-law Diane hang curtains I'd never seen before while my wife sat on our bed nodding along like this was completely normal. The curtains were beige. Everything Diane touched turned beige. My hands were still dusty from the construction site, my work boots leaving prints on the hardwood floor that I'd refinished myself 6 months ago, and I couldn't form words because my brain was trying to process why there was a stranger's furniture truck parked in my driveway and why my wife wasn't looking at me. I'd been a project manager for Donovan and Associates Construction for 8 years. I spent my days coordinating teams, solving problems, managing budgets down to the cent. I was good at reading situations, at seeing when something was off. The house was quiet when I left that morning. Olivia had kissed me goodbye at 6:30, told me she loved me, reminded me we had dinner with her parents on Saturday. Normal Thursday, normal life. I came home early because the concrete pour got delayed, and I'd walked into what looked like a home invasion, except the invader had a key and my wife's smile. "Adrian, you're home early," Olivia said, and her voice had that bright fake quality she used when she was nervous. She stood up from the bed, smoothing down her dress. "Mom wanted to surprise us. Isn't it lovely?" She gestured around the room like she was showcasing a museum exhibit. The artwork on the walls was different. Our wedding photo that had hung above the dresser was gone, replaced by some generic landscape print. The lamp on my nightstand, the one I'd bought at an antique store in Portland on our honeymoon, was sitting in a cardboard box by the door. "We're upgrading," Olivia added, and something in the way she said, "we're," made my stomach turn. Diane stepped down from the small ladder she'd been using, wiping her hands on her slacks. She was 58, dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting, her silver hair in that precise bob she'd maintained for decades. "Adrian, darling, I know this must be a shock, but Olivia and I have been discussing this for weeks. This room had become rather eclectic. You understand?" She said eclectic, the way someone might say diseased. I looked at my wife, waiting for her to laugh, to tell her mother this was too far, but Olivia was examining the new curtains like they held the secrets of the universe. I'd picked out almost everything in this room. The mission-style bed frame I'd restored, the reading chair by the window where I spent Sunday mornings, the gallery wall of our travel photos. 3 years of making this space ours, and it was being packed into boxes by a woman who'd told me at our rehearsal dinner that I seemed nice enough for now. I should have said something right then. Should have drawn a line, asserted some boundary, done what any reasonable person would do when they find their personal space being systematically dismantled. Instead, I said, "Can we talk about this?" Which in retrospect was the wrong move because it implied there was something to discuss. Diane smiled, that thin-lipped expression of satisfaction she wore when she felt she was winning. "Of course, dear. Why don't you shower and change and we can all sit down like adults?" The dismissal was clear. I was dirty from work, I was unexpected, I was an interruption to their project. I looked at Olivia again, really looked at her, trying to find my wife in there somewhere. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I went to take a shower, but I didn't stay in there long. The bathroom was untouched, still mine, still ours. I could hear them talking in the bedroom, Diane's voice carrying that authoritative tone she used when she was explaining something to someone she considered beneath her understanding. I got dressed, pulled on jeans and a t-shirt, and when I came back out they'd hung a new mirror above the dresser. It was ornate, gold-framed, completely wrong for the room. "We thought something more classic," Diane said, catching my expression. "Olivia has been wanting to elevate the aesthetic, haven't you, sweetheart?" Olivia nodded. She'd been nodding a lot. That night, after Diane finally left, and the furniture truck pulled away with half our bedroom in it, I tried to talk to Olivia. We sat in our living room, which was apparently next on Diane's list, because she'd mentioned something about those dreadful throw pillows before she left. I asked Olivia what was happening, why she hadn't talked to me about any of this, why she'd let her mother come into our home and redecorate without asking me. She said I was being dramatic, said her mother was just trying to help, that the room needed updating, that I was too attached to stuff. I pointed out that the stuff was our stuff, our choices, our memories. She said memories weren't things. I didn't know how to argue with that because technically she was right, but also she was completely missing the point. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane came back 5 more times. She brought swatches, paint samples, fabric books. She measured windows, talked about flow and cohesion, and each time Olivia treated it like a fun mother-daughter activity while I was carefully edited out of every decision. I'd come home to find new throw pillows, a different coffee table, curtains in the living room that blocked the morning light I loved. "Small changes," Olivia said. "Just improvements." I started documenting it with my phone, taking pictures of each alteration, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy, that this was actually happening. I had photos dated and time-stamped. October 3rd, the bedroom. October 5th, the living room. October 10th, the dining room chairs we'd picked out together replaced with something Diane found at an estate sale. I called my brother Leo on a Friday night after Olivia went to bed early with a headache. Leo was a family therapist in Seattle, dealt with boundary issues for a living. I expected him to tell me this was normal mother-daughter stuff, maybe a little intrusive, but harmless. Instead, he was quiet for a long time after I explained everything. Then he said, "Adrian, I need you to think about something. Is Diane changing the house, or is she changing Olivia?" I didn't understand what he meant. He explained that systematic erasure of a partner's choices and preferences, especially when enabled by a family member, was a red flag for something called coercive control. It sounded dramatic. It sounded like something that happened to other people. But then I thought about how Olivia had stopped asking my opinion about anything related to the house. How she'd started saying "we" when she meant her and her mother. How I'd become a guest in my own home. The breaking point came on a Monday. I'd taken the day off to work on a personal project in the garage, building a bookshelf for the nursery we'd been planning to start on next year. I'd mentioned the bookshelf to Olivia weeks ago, shown her the design, gotten her excited about it. I was in the garage with my tools spread out, measurements marked, when I heard a vehicle in the driveway. I looked out to see Diane's black Mercedes, and my first thought was that Olivia hadn't mentioned she was coming over. My second thought was that I should probably go inside before she decided the garage needed reorganizing too. I walked into the house through the side door, and I could hear them upstairs, in the nursery, the room we hadn't even started on yet, the room that was still just empty space and possibilities. I took the stairs two at a time, and when I got to the doorway, I saw Diane measuring the walls while Olivia stood there with a catalog open. "I think the crib should go here," Diane was saying, pointing to the east wall. "And we'll need proper storage, none of those cheap particle board things. I know a wonderful craftsman who does custom work." She glanced at me in the doorway, barely pausing. "Adrian, good, you're here. We're planning the nursery. Olivia told me you two are thinking about starting a family soon." The rage that hit me was physical, hot and sharp and overwhelming. This wasn't about taste anymore. Wasn't about curtains or throw pillows or coffee tables. This was about our future, our child, our family being planned and designed and decided by someone who wasn't me. I managed to keep my voice level, barely. "Can I talk to my wife alone, please?" Diane looked at Olivia, not at me, waiting for permission. Olivia hesitated, then nodded, and Diane left the room with this little satisfied smile like she'd won something. As soon as she was gone, I asked Olivia what the hell was happening, why her mother was planning our baby's room, why I wasn't part of any of these conversations. Olivia said I was overreacting, said her mother had experience, had raised 2 kids, knew what worked. I asked her if she remembered that I existed, if she remembered that this was supposed to be our marriage, our home, our life. She cried, told me I was being mean to her mother, that Diane was just trying to help, that I was making everything difficult. I'd never seen Olivia like this before. In 3 years together, she'd been confident, independent, sure of herself. Now she sounded like a child defending a parent, and I realized with creeping horror that I didn't know when the change had happened. Had it been gradual? Had I missed the signs? I thought back over the past 6 months and started seeing patterns I'd ignored. Diane calling every day, sometimes twice. Olivia checking with her mother before making decisions about what to cook for dinner, what to wear to events, whether to accept a promotion at work. The independence I'd fallen in love with had been slowly, methodically eroded, and I'd been too busy with work and life to notice. I contacted a lawyer on Thursday morning, not because I wanted a divorce, but because I needed to understand my rights. Her name was Patricia Thornton, and she'd been practicing family law for 23 years according to her website. I met her at her office downtown during my lunch break, explained the situation while she took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me with this expression that was part sympathy, part concern. "Mr. Foster, what you're describing falls into a category we call undue influence. Your mother-in-law is systematically inserting herself into your marriage, and your wife is allowing it. The question is whether your wife is a willing participant or whether she's being manipulated." I asked how I could tell the difference. She said, "Does your wife seem happy with these changes, or does she seem anxious when her mother isn't around?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Olivia seemed fine when Diane was there, animated even, engaged in all the planning and decorating. But when it was just us, she was withdrawn, tired. She'd stopped initiating conversations about our future, stopped making plans that didn't involve her mother's input. Patricia suggested I document everything, keep records of the changes being made to the house, note any financial impact, track the frequency of Diane's visits. She said if things escalated, I might need evidence. I asked what escalation looked like. She said, "When your mother-in-law has more say in your marriage than you do, you're already there." I started keeping detailed notes. Dates, times, what was changed, what was said. I felt ridiculous doing it, like I was building a case against my own wife, but Patricia had been clear that documentation mattered. On October 18th, Diane rearranged our kitchen. Not just the decor, the actual layout. She hired someone to move the refrigerator, reorganize the cabinets, install new lighting. I came home to find Olivia helping her mother arrange dishes in a completely different configuration than we'd had for 3 years. When I asked why, Diane said the old layout was inefficient, that she'd worked with a kitchen designer to optimize the space. I hadn't known our kitchen needed optimizing. That weekend, I suggested to Olivia that we take a trip, just the 2 of us, Maybe go back to Portland where we'd honeymooned. Get away from the house, from the constant projects, from her mother. She said she couldn't, that she'd promised to help Diane pick out furniture for their lake house on Saturday. I asked if we could schedule something for the following weekend. She said maybe, but she'd have to check with her mother because they might be installing the new backsplash in our kitchen. I asked why she needed to check with her mother about our weekend plans. She said I was being controlling. The irony wasn't lost on me, but pointing it out seemed like a bad strategy. Instead, I went to Portland alone that Saturday, spent the day walking around the neighborhoods we'd explored on our honeymoon, trying to figure out when I'd lost my wife. I called Leo from a coffee shop on Hawthorne Street, told him everything that had happened in the past month. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he said, "Adrian, I think you need to consider the possibility that Olivia isn't going to choose you over her mother. Some people can't break that bond, even when it's unhealthy. You need to decide what you're willing to live with." I wasn't willing to live with this, but I didn't know how to fix it. I'd tried talking to Olivia, tried setting boundaries, tried involving a lawyer, and nothing had changed except now I had a file folder full of documentation that proved my life was being systematically taken apart. I needed something bigger, something that would make Olivia see what was happening. I needed proof that what Diane was doing wasn't normal, wasn't helping, wasn't love. I found that proof on a Wednesday evening in early November. I'd installed a security camera in our living room the week before, telling Olivia it was for home security after there'd been a break-in 3 streets over. Really, I wanted to see what happened when I wasn't home, wanted evidence of these marathon decorating sessions. I'd checked the footage every few days, watching time-stamped videos of Diane and Olivia rearranging furniture, discussing paint colors, measuring walls. Boring stuff, nothing I didn't already know about. But on November 8th, I pulled up the footage from that afternoon and saw something that changed everything. Diane and Olivia were sitting on the couch, the new couch that Diane had insisted would open up the space better than the one we'd bought together. They were looking at what appeared to be legal documents, and I could hear them clearly because the camera had decent audio. Diane was saying, "The trust is already set up, sweetheart. Once you're pregnant, we'll move forward with the property transfer. This house will be solely in your name, protected from any Marshall assets claim he might make." Olivia was nodding, asking questions about timelines and lawyers. Diane said, "We'll wait until the baby comes. He'll be locked in then, committed. And if things don't work out, you'll have full ownership and custody leverage." I watched that section of video 12 times, transcribed every word, checked and rechecked the timestamp. November 8th, 2:15 p.m., my wife and her mother planning to financially and legally trap me using a pregnancy that hadn't even happened yet. I sat in my home office with the door locked, staring at the computer screen, trying to process the level of calculation this required. This wasn't about decorating. This wasn't about taste or style or mother-daughter bonding. This was a systematic plan to ensure that if our marriage failed, Olivia would have every advantage and I would have nothing. The house I'd put $30,000 into renovating, the home we'd built together, was going to be signed over to her alone under the guise of a trust. I called Patricia Thornton at 8:30 the next morning, before I'd even gone to work. Told her I had video evidence of my wife and mother-in-law discussing financial arrangements I hadn't agreed to. She told me to come in immediately, bring the footage, don't mention it to anyone. I met her at 9:15, brought my laptop, showed her the video. She watched it 3 times, made notes, asked me questions about our financial arrangements. We had a joint checking account. The house was in both our names. We'd always split major expenses. I'd contributed more to the down payment, but we'd agreed it didn't matter because we were married. We were partners. We were in it together. Patricia asked if I had proof of my financial contributions. I did. I had bank records, receipts, loan documents. I'd kept everything because I was good at record keeping, because it mattered in construction to track expenses. I'd never thought I'd need it for this. Patricia explained that what Diane was proposing might not be illegal, depending on how the trust was structured, but the deception certainly was. The fact that they were planning this without my knowledge, intending to use a pregnancy as timing leverage, indicated intent to defraud. She said I had options. I could confront Olivia directly with the evidence. I could file for legal separation to protect my assets. I could wait and gather more information. I asked what she would do. She said, "I'd want to know how deep this goes. One video is damning, but it's not the full picture. If you can stomach it, keep the camera running. Find out what else they're planning." I kept the camera running. Over the next 3 weeks, I collected 18 hours of footage of Diane and Olivia together in my house while I was at work. Most of it was mundane, more decorating discussions, shopping catalogs, talk about Diane's friends and their opinions on various design choices. But scattered throughout were conversations that revealed the scope of what they were planning. On November 12th, Diane mentioned that her lawyer, a man named Jeffrey Blackwell, had drafted the trust documents and was waiting for Olivia's signature. On November 15th, they discussed life insurance policies, with Diane suggesting that Olivia increase the payout on my policy without telling me. On November 20th, Diane said that once the baby came, they could start pushing me out gradually, make me uncomfortable enough that I'd want to leave, and then Olivia could claim abandonment. I documented everything. Timestamps, transcripts, context notes. I created a spreadsheet with dates and summaries. I made backup copies on 3 different drives. I'd never been the paranoid type, But I'd also never been married to someone who was plotting against me with her mother's help. I still went to work every day, still came home and had dinner with Olivia, still pretended everything was normal. It was the hardest acting job of my life. Every time I looked at her, I saw the woman I'd married and the stranger who was planning to trap me. I kept waiting for her to slip, to give some indication that she felt guilty or conflicted, but she seemed fine. Happy, even. The house was coming together exactly how she and Diane wanted it. On November 23rd, 3 days before Thanksgiving, I met with Patricia and a private investigator named Russell Kane. Russell had 30 years of experience in fraud cases, had worked with Patricia on dozens of divorces involving hidden assets and deception. I showed them everything I'd collected: the video footage, the transcripts, the financial records showing my contributions to the house. Russell watched the videos without expression, took notes in a small black notebook, asked clarifying questions about timelines and dates. When we finished, he said, "Mr. Foster, what you have here is evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Your wife and her mother are planning to manipulate marital assets and use a potential pregnancy as leverage to trap you in a disadvantageous position. This goes beyond a difficult mother-in-law. This is calculated, deliberate, and actionable." Patricia asked if I wanted to proceed with legal action. I asked what that meant. She laid out my options in detail. Option 1, confront Olivia with the evidence, demand she cease contact with her mother, attempt marital counseling. Success rate, low, because people who are this enmeshed don't typically break away without significant intervention. Option 2, file for divorce immediately, use the evidence to protect my assets, get out before they could execute their plan. Success rate, high for protecting myself, 0 for saving the marriage. Option 3, let them proceed, document everything, wait until they made an actual legal move, then expose it all publicly and legally with overwhelming evidence. Success rate, highest for complete vindication, but also highest risk of getting hurt in the process. I went home that night and Olivia had made dinner. She'd cooked my favorite meal, chicken piccata with roasted vegetables, and the table was set with candles. She smiled when I walked in, told me she'd missed me, that we'd both been so busy lately, and she wanted to reconnect. I sat down across from her and tried to reconcile the woman who'd made my favorite dinner with the woman I'd heard on video discussing how to trap me. She asked about my day. I said it was fine. The concrete pour had finally happened. We were back on schedule. She told me about her day, how she'd had lunch with her mother, how they'd picked out a beautiful rug for the living room. She reached across the table and took my hand, said she loved me, that she knew things had been tense, but she appreciated me being patient with all the changes. I told her I loved her too, and I meant it, which somehow made everything worse. Thanksgiving was at Diane's house, like every year. Diane lived in a restored Victorian in the historic district, the kind of house that looked like it should be in a magazine spread about successful people with excellent taste. Olivia's father, Richard, was there, along with her younger sister Amanda and Amanda's husband, Kyle. Richard was a retired investment banker, quiet and controlled, the kind of man who communicated in measured statements and avoided conflict. We'd always gotten along fine, mostly by virtue of not having much to talk about. I'd tried to connect with him over the years, but Diane dominated every conversation, and Richard seemed content to fade into the background. Dinner was exactly what I expected: expensive, perfect, and uncomfortable. Diane held court at the head of the table, directing conversation, making pronouncements about current events and family matters. She mentioned that she'd been helping Olivia civilize our house, said it with a little laugh like it was a joke, but her eyes were sharp when she looked at me. I smiled politely, said Olivia had great taste, which was true before her mother got involved. Diane said, "Well, she gets it from me." And everyone laughed except Richard, who was focused on his plate. After dinner, while the women were in the kitchen preparing dessert, Richard asked me to help him get something from the garage. We walked out through the back door, across the perfectly landscaped yard, and into Diane's 3-car garage that was cleaner than most people's kitchens. Richard didn't actually need to get anything. He turned to face me, and his expression was different than I'd ever seen it, less neutral, more present. "Adrian, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is Diane interfering in your marriage?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that I didn't know how to answer. I asked why he was asking. He said, "Because I've watched her do this before, with Amanda." Diane tried to control every aspect of Amanda's relationship until Kyle put his foot down and they moved to Boston. I didn't stop it then, and I've regretted it ever since. I won't make that mistake again. I told him everything: the redecorating, the boundary violations, the video footage, the trust documents, all of it. Richard listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as I talked. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I need to see that footage." I asked why. He said, "Because Diane has controlled this family for 30 years, and if you have proof of what she's doing, I can use it to protect you and Olivia both. But I need to see it first." I told him I'd send him the relevant clips that night. He nodded, and we went back inside like nothing had happened. I sent Richard the video files at midnight after Olivia had gone to bed. 3 clips, totaling about 45 minutes, covering the most damning conversations about the trust, the life insurance, and the plan to push me out after a baby came. I included timestamps and brief descriptions. Richard replied at 1:30 a.m. with a single sentence. Meet me at my office tomorrow at 10. Don't tell Diane or Olivia. He worked as a consultant now, had an office in a building downtown. I told Olivia I had a meeting with a new contractor in the morning, left the house at 9:30, and met Richard at 10 exactly. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this. His office was modest, nothing like Diane's carefully curated aesthetic. He had me sit down, closed the door, and played the video clips on his computer. He watched them all the way through, then watched them again. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. I knew she was controlling, but this is beyond anything I imagined. She's actively sabotaging your marriage for her own purposes. The question is, what does Olivia actually want? Is she fully on board with this, or is she being manipulated? I said I didn't know anymore, that the woman in those videos seemed like a stranger. Richard said, I'm going to talk to Olivia, alone, without Diane. I need to understand how deep her involvement goes. Can you keep Diane occupied for a few hours on Saturday? We planned it like a military operation. Saturday afternoon, I'd call Diane and ask for her help with something at our house, something that required her expertise and attention. Richard would call Olivia and ask to meet her for coffee, say he wanted to talk about Christmas plans. While Diane was with me, Richard would show Olivia the footage and gauge her reaction. If she was horrified, if she didn't know the full extent of what her mother was planning, there might be a chance to salvage things. If she defended it, if she was fully complicit, then I'd have my answer. Saturday came. I called Diane at 1 p.m., told her the kitchen faucet was acting up, and I remembered her mentioning that she knew a good plumber. Could she come take a look? Maybe give me his contact information? She said she'd be there in 20 minutes. I texted Richard. She's coming. He replied. Got it. Diane arrived in 18 minutes, walked into the kitchen with her phone already out, ready to solve my problem. I'd loosened the faucet handle slightly so it really was leaking, a detail I knew she'd appreciate. She examined it, made some comments about the quality of modern fixtures, called her plumber right there, and scheduled him for Monday morning. The whole thing took 15 minutes, but I'd asked her to stay for coffee, said I wanted her advice on some landscaping decisions for the spring. We sat in the living room, the one she'd redesigned, and I asked her questions about drainage and native plants and curb appeal, things I actually knew a lot about from construction, but pretended to need guidance on. Diane loved being the expert, loved explaining things to people who didn't know better. She talked for an hour and a half, pulling up photos on her phone, making sketches on a notepad, completely absorbed in the performance of being helpful. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Done. Coming to you. 10 minutes later, Richard's car pulled into my driveway. Diane looked up, surprised. Richard, what are you doing here? He walked in without knocking, and his expression was something I'd never seen on him before. Fury. Pure, unfiltered rage. Diane, go home, now. She blinked, confused. What are you talking about? I'm helping Adrian with... He cut her off. I know what you've been doing. I've seen the footage. I've talked to Olivia. Go home, and if you ever attempt to manipulate our daughter or her marriage again, I will divorce you and make sure everyone we know understands exactly who you are. The color drained from Diane's face. She looked at me, then back at Richard. I don't know what he's told you, but... Richard held up his phone, played a 30-second clip of her and Olivia discussing the trust documents. Go. Home. Diane left. She didn't argue, didn't try to defend herself, just grabbed her purse and walked out. The second the door closed, I asked Richard what happened with Olivia. He sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. She didn't know, not all of it. Diane told her the trust was a normal estate planning tool, that lots of couples did separate property protections. Olivia didn't know about the timing around pregnancy, didn't know about the life insurance suggestions, didn't know about the plan to push you out. When I showed her the footage, she was devastated. I asked where she was now. He said, she's in my car. She wanted to come in, but I told her to wait. I needed to make sure Diane was gone first. Olivia came in looking wrecked. Her eyes were red, her makeup smeared, and she couldn't look at me. Richard excused himself, said he'd wait in his car, and left us alone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Olivia said, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear to God, Adrian, I didn't know what she was really doing. I asked her what she thought she was doing, because even if she didn't know the full plan, she'd let her mother take over our lives for months. She said, I thought I was making things better. Mom said you didn't care about design, that you'd be happy as long as I was happy, and I wanted the house to be perfect. I wanted everything to be perfect. I didn't realize she was... She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. I asked her why she hadn't included me in any of the decisions, why every conversation had been about what she and Diane wanted. She said, because it was easier. Because Mom had all these ideas and you were always working and I thought I was taking something off your plate. I thought I was being a good wife by handling it myself. I told her that being a good wife meant being my partner, not her mother's project manager. She started crying for real then, the kind of crying that comes from realizing you've been wrong about something fundamental. She said her mother had been in her head since she was a child, telling her how to think, what to want, who to be. She'd thought she'd gotten away from it. But the second they'd started planning to buy a house together, Diane had swooped back in with advice and suggestions and slowly, steadily taken control again. I wanted to forgive her on the spot, wanted to believe that she was a victim in this too, but I kept seeing those videos, hearing her voice discussing the trust, asking questions about timing. I asked her about the trust documents directly. When had she planned to tell me? She said she wasn't going to sign them, that her mother had been pressuring her but she'd been stalling. I asked if I could see the documents. She said they were at her mother's house. I asked her to get them. She called Diane right there, on speaker, and demanded she bring over the trust papers. Diane tried to argue, said they could discuss it later, but Olivia's voice was steel. Bring them now, or I'll never speak to you again. Diane arrived 30 minutes later with a leather portfolio. She tried to come inside, but Richard blocked her, took the portfolio, and closed the door in her face. Inside were the trust documents, exactly as described in the video. The house would be transferred to a trust in Olivia's name only, with Diane as co-trustee. I'd have no ownership rights, no claim to the property even though I'd paid more than half the down payment and all of the renovation costs. There were also draft life insurance policy changes, increasing my coverage to $1 million with Olivia as the sole beneficiary. And there were notes, in Diane's handwriting, outlining a timeline. Get pregnant by March. Transfer house by June. Increase insurance by August. If marriage fails, file for custody immediately. Olivia read through all of it, getting paler with each page. I never agreed to any of this, she kept saying. I never would have agreed to this. I asked her about the conversations I'd recorded, the ones where she'd ask questions about the trust and the timing. She said her mother had presented it as normal financial planning, had told her that lots of women protected themselves this way, that it was smart to have assets in her own name just in case. She'd asked questions because she was trying to understand, not because she was plotting. She'd never looked at the actual documents, never seen the timeline, never knew about the insurance or the custody planning. Diane had been feeding her pieces of the plan, keeping her just informed enough to stay compliant, but not informed enough to see the whole picture. Richard had been standing quietly by the window, watching all of this unfold. Now he turned to Olivia and said, "You need to decide right now what you want. Do you want your marriage, or do you want your mother?" Olivia looked at him, then at me, and for the first time in months, I saw clarity in her expression. "I want my marriage. I want my husband back. I want my mother out of my life until she gets serious help." Richard nodded. "Then that's what we'll make happen." What followed was 3 days of intensive legal and family maneuvering. Patricia Thornton reviewed all the documents, confirmed that nothing had been legally executed yet, and helped me draft a cease and desist letter to Diane, explicitly forbidding her from entering our property or contacting Olivia without written permission. Richard hired a family therapist named Dr. Helen Vasquez, who specialized in enmeshed family systems. Dr. Vasquez met with Olivia for 3 hours on Sunday, then met with both of us together on Monday, and confirmed what Leo had suspected months ago. Diane had been systematically undermining our marriage and controlling Olivia through a combination of guilt, manipulation, and what Dr. Vasquez called engineered dependency. On Wednesday, we met with Diane at Richard's insistence. He'd told her that if she refused, he'd proceed with divorce and make all of the documentation public. We met at a neutral location, a conference room Richard rented at an office building downtown. Diane arrived dressed like she was going to a business meeting, completely composed. She sat down across from us, looked at Richard, and said, "This is ridiculous. I was trying to protect our daughter." Richard slid the trust documents across the table. Protect her from what? From her husband? From her marriage? From her own choices? Diane picked up the papers, glanced at them, set them back down. "You don't understand. Adrian is fine now, but people change. I've seen too many women left with nothing when marriages fail. I was ensuring Olivia's security." I asked if she'd considered asking me about it, including me in those plans, treating me like a partner instead of a threat. She looked at me like I'd said something charmingly naive. Men always think they'll be different until they're not. I was being practical. Olivia, sitting next to me, said quietly, "You were trying to destroy my marriage from the inside. That's not protection, Mom. That's sabotage." Diane's composure cracked slightly. "I was trying to give you advantages, power, control, things I never had." Richard made a sound like a bitter laugh. "You have controlled every aspect of this family for 30 years. Don't pretend you're a victim." Diane turned on him. "Because you let me. Because you were too weak to stop me. Because someone had to make decisions." The mask was slipping now, and what was underneath was uglier than I'd imagined. She looked back at Olivia. "Everything I've done has been for you, to make sure you have the best possible life. If you can't see that..." Olivia cut her off. "I see that you tried to manipulate me into betraying my husband. I see that you planned out how to trap him using a baby that doesn't even exist. I see that you value control more than you value my happiness." We gave Diane a choice, mediated by Patricia and witnessed by a court reporter Richard had hired. Option 1. She would cease all contact with Olivia and me for a minimum of 6 months, during which time she would attend mandatory therapy with a specialist in personality disorders. She would sign a legal agreement acknowledging that the house belonged to both of us and that she had no claims or rights to any of our marital assets. She would write a formal apology to both of us, acknowledging the harm she'd caused. If she completed these requirements, Olivia would consider gradually rebuilding their relationship with strict boundaries. Option 2. We would pursue a restraining order, make all the documentation public including the videos and trust documents, and Olivia would cut contact permanently. Diane chose option 1, but only barely. She signed the legal agreement with a pen Richard provided, wrote a brief, perfunctory apology that Patricia said would have to be sufficient, and left the room without another word. Richard stayed behind, told us he was filing for separation from Diane that week. He said he'd stayed too long already, enabled her behavior, failed to protect his daughters. He wanted to be part of our lives going forward, but he understood if we needed distance from the whole family. Olivia hugged him for a long time, crying, and I realized this was the first time I'd ever seen them have a genuine moment together without Diane orchestrating it. The house was the hardest part to fix. Every room had Diane's stamp on it, her choices, her vision. Olivia couldn't stand looking at it anymore. We spent 3 weekends systematically undoing everything Diane had done. We repainted the bedroom in colors we chose together. We bought back furniture from the consignment store where Diane had sent our old pieces. We hung our wedding photo back above the dresser. Some things couldn't be recovered, but we replaced them with new choices we made as a team. The nursery stayed empty. We both agreed we weren't ready for that conversation yet, might not be for a long time, and that was okay. Olivia started intensive therapy with Dr. Vasquez, twice a week at first, then weekly. I joined her for couples sessions every other week. Dr. Vasquez explained that Diane likely had narcissistic personality disorder, combined with severe control issues, and that Olivia had been trained since childhood to prioritize her mother's needs over her own. Unlearning those patterns would take time, conscious effort, and a lot of uncomfortable realizations. Olivia cried through most of the early sessions, grieving the mother she'd wished she had, accepting the mother she actually did. I grieved too, for the year we'd lost to Diane's manipulation, for the trust we had to rebuild from scratch. 6 months later, in May, Diane completed her therapy requirement. Her therapist, a clinical psychologist named Dr. Raymond Ortiz, sent a letter to Patricia confirming that Diane had attended all sessions and had made moderate progress in recognizing boundary issues. He could not, however, confirm that she'd fundamentally changed her worldview or control patterns. The letter was clinical and careful, the kind of assessment that said more in what it didn't say. Olivia read it, talked to Dr. Vasquez about whether to allow contact, and decided to wait. She wrote her mother a letter explaining that she needed more time, that 6 months of therapy didn't undo 30 years of manipulation, and that she'd reach out when she was ready. Diane responded with a 5-page letter blaming me for poisoning Olivia against her, claiming that I'd orchestrated this entire situation to isolate Olivia from her family. She said she was the real victim, that Richard had abandoned her, that her daughters had turned against her, and that someday we'd all realize what we'd lost. The letter was unhinged enough that Dr. Vasquez suggested we document it, keep it on file in case Diane escalated. Olivia read it once, then put it in a folder with all the other evidence we'd collected. She said, "My mother will never admit she was wrong. I need to accept that." Richard, by contrast, became someone I actually enjoyed spending time with. Without Diane's influence, he was thoughtful, funny, interested in the world. He started coming over for dinner every few weeks, helped me with some of the house projects, talked to Olivia about her work and her life without judgment or agenda. He'd filed for divorce in January, and Diane had fought it viciously, trying to claim he was having a breakdown, that I'd manipulated him too. The court hadn't bought it, especially after Richard's lawyer presented evidence of Diane's behavior patterns. The divorce was finalized in August, and Richard moved into a condo in the Pearl District. He seemed lighter somehow, like he'd been holding his breath for decades, and finally exhaled. Amanda, Olivia's sister, called in September. She and Kyle had moved back from Boston, said they'd heard everything that happened, wanted to reconnect. We met them for dinner at a restaurant downtown, and Amanda spent the first 20 minutes apologizing for not warning us about Diane. She said she'd tried to tell Olivia years ago that their mother was toxic, but Olivia hadn't been ready to hear it. Kyle added that they'd moved to Boston specifically to escape Diane's influence, and they should have been more explicit about why. Amanda said Diane had tried the same thing with her, had attempted to insert herself into every aspect of their marriage until Kyle had finally put his foot down and threatened to cut contact entirely. They'd been estranged from Diane for 5 years, and Amanda said it was the best decision she'd ever made. The lawsuit came in October, 11 months after everything had exploded. Diane filed a civil suit against me for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and alienation of affection. The last one was particularly bizarre since alienation of affection hadn't been a valid cause of action in our state for decades. Patricia said the lawsuit was frivolous, likely Diane's last attempt to exert control, and we'd get it dismissed quickly. She was right. The judge threw it out at the first hearing, told Diane's lawyer that the claims were without merit and bordered on harassment. Diane was ordered to pay our legal fees, which totaled $8,000. Olivia and I are still in therapy, still working on rebuilding trust and communication. Some days are harder than others. She'll make a decision without asking my input, and I'll tense up, wondering if we're sliding backward. She'll catch herself deferring to someone else's opinion and have to actively choose to trust her own judgment. We're both hyper-aware of patterns now, of the ways control can slip in quietly, disguised as help or love or family. Dr. Vasquez says we're doing well, that the fact that we're conscious of these patterns means we can actively work against them. She says most couples never develop that level of awareness. They just repeat cycles without understanding why. I never did build that bookshelf for the nursery we'd been planning. The room is still empty, painted a neutral cream color, waiting. We've talked about it in therapy, about whether we still want kids, whether we trust ourselves to raise a child without repeating the patterns we've seen. Olivia worries she'll become her mother. I worry I won't see the signs if she starts to. Dr. Vasquez says these are healthy fears, that they mean we're taking the responsibility seriously. She says when we're ready, we'll know, and if we're never ready, that's okay too. The house looks like ours again. The bedroom has the mission-style bed frame I restored, the reading chair by the window, the gallery wall of travel photos. The living room has our mismatched throw pillows and the coffee table we picked out together. The kitchen is laid out the way we had it originally, the way that made sense for how we cooked and lived. It's not magazine perfect anymore, not carefully curated and designed, but it's ours. Every object in it represents a choice we made together, and that matters more than aesthetic cohesion. Richard came over last Sunday to help me install new shelving in the garage. While we were working, he said, "I owe you an apology I've never given you. I should have stopped Diane decades ago. I should have protected my daughters from her. I'm sorry you had to be the one to finally stand up to her." I told him we'd both been blind to it, me and Olivia and him, that Diane was skilled at making her control seem normal. He said, "She is, but you saw it eventually, and you did something about it. That takes courage." I said it didn't feel like courage. It felt like survival. He said sometimes those are the same thing. Olivia is meeting with a real estate agent on Thursday, not to sell our house, but to help her understand property law and ownership rights. She wants to work in estate planning, helping people navigate family trusts and inheritance issues. She says she wants to make sure other people don't fall into the traps her mother set. Dr. Vasquez thinks it's a healthy channeling of her experience, a way to reclaim power from what happened. I think it means she's finally becoming the person she was supposed to be before Diane spent 30 years telling her who to be instead. I still have all the documentation, all the videos and transcripts and legal filings. Patricia suggested I keep everything for at least 10 years, just in case Diane tries something else. She says people with personality disorders don't typically change. They just find new ways to exert control. Richard agrees. He said Diane sends him emails sometimes, long rambling messages about how everyone has turned against her, how she was only trying to help, how ungrateful we all are. He deletes them without reading past the first line. Amanda said she gets them too, has been getting them for years. She said Diane will never take responsibility, never admit fault, never see herself as anything but the victim of other people's cruelty. Olivia hasn't responded to any of her mother's attempts at contact. Diane tried calling on Olivia's birthday in December, sent flowers to our house on Valentine's Day with a card that said, "I miss my daughter." Olivia gave the flowers to a nursing home, threw the card away. She says she's not ready to forgive her mother, might never be ready, and she's made peace with that possibility. Dr. Vasquez says that's healthy, that forgiveness isn't mandatory, especially when the person hasn't changed, and contact would be harmful. Olivia says someday she might be able to have a limited relationship with Diane, carefully boundaried and supervised, but that day isn't today and might not come for years. I think about how close we came to falling into Diane's trap. If I hadn't installed that camera, if Richard hadn't asked me the right question at Thanksgiving, if Olivia had signed those trust documents before I found out, we would have had a baby, and Diane would have owned our marriage, and eventually, I would have been pushed out exactly as planned. Olivia says she would have realized eventually, would have seen what was happening, but we both know that's hopeful thinking. People stay in bad situations for years, decades, lifetimes, because they can't see the pattern they're trapped in. We got lucky. We got caught at exactly the right moment, with exactly enough evidence to make the truth undeniable. The construction site where I work is finishing up this month. We've been building a community center in Northeast Portland, a project that's taken 2 years and millions of dollars, and the coordination of dozens of teams. I've spent the past week doing final inspections, checking every detail, making sure everything meets code and exceeds expectations. My boss, a man named Victor Ramsey, who's been in construction for 40 years, told me this was some of my best work. He said I'd been distracted for a while there, but over the past 6 months I'd been sharper, more present, more engaged. I told him I'd had some personal issues that were resolved. He said whatever I'd done, keep doing it. Olivia and I are planning a trip for our anniversary in June. We're going back to Portland, staying at the same hotel where we honeymooned, retracing the steps of those early days when everything felt possible. We're calling it a renewal trip, a chance to remember who we were before Diane tried to remake us into her image. Dr. Vasquez suggested we write vows to each other, not wedding vows but marriage vows, promises based on what we've learned and who we've become. Olivia has been working on hers for weeks, writing and rewriting, trying to get the words right. I told her anything she writes will be perfect, because it'll be honest. She said that's what scares her, the honesty. I said honesty is all we have left. Might as well embrace it. Last week, Amanda called to tell us that Diane had started dating someone, a widower she'd met at her country club. Amanda said the man seemed nice, seemed genuinely interested in Diane, and she hoped for his sake that he knew what he was getting into. Olivia said we should warn him. I said we couldn't, that he'd have to figure it out himself just like we did. Richard said if the relationship got serious, he'd make sure the man knew about the divorce, about the patterns, about what to watch for. He said it was the least he could do, a kindness to a stranger who might become Diane's next target. I deleted the security camera footage last month. Patricia said I didn't need it anymore. The legal issues were resolved, and keeping it was just letting Diane occupy mental space she didn't deserve. I backed everything up one final time, put it on a drive in our safe deposit box, and erased it from my computer. Olivia said she was glad, that she didn't want that evidence in our house, didn't want to risk accidentally seeing it again. She said moving forward meant leaving some things behind, and the documentation had served its purpose. The empty nursery still waits. Some days I walk past it and feel the loss of what we'd planned, the future that got derailed. Other days I walk past it and feel relief that we didn't bring a child into the situation we were in, that we have time now to heal and grow and make sure we're ready. Dr. Vasquez says there's no deadline, no timeline we have to follow, no external pressure we have to meet. She says when we decide to fill that room, if we decide to fill that room, it'll be our choice made in our time for our reasons. And that's the whole point of everything we've been through, learning to make our own choices without someone else's agenda lurking underneath. I'm standing in our bedroom right now, the one we reclaimed, looking at the mission-style bed frame I spent weeks restoring. The reading chair by the window where I spend Sunday mornings. The gallery wall of photos from our travels, our life, our story. Everything in this room was chosen by us, represents us, belongs to us. It's not much, in the grand scheme of things. Just furniture and photos and a space we share. But it's ours in a way it never was when Diane was orchestrating everything, and that makes all the difference. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.